everybody, before I get to this video, I would just like to mention that I do have an Instagram page. I have been typing the Instagram name in my descriptions for the last few videos, and I'll do it again for this video, but I wanted to mention it because that is where I'm posting pictures of different vegetables that I'm harvesting from my garden. I really wanted to be able to do a harvest video for you, but the thing is that all my vegetables are maturing at different times, and so at any given time I really don't have enough vegetables to constitute a whole video. So I've decided to put those harvest updates onto my Instagram instead. So it is Brittany_Dane, and if you go over there, you'll see some vegetables that I've already picked in the last few weeks. Now this video is going to be another video for my Gardening 101 series, Composting 101. Now you may wonder, okay, if we're doing a video on composting, why am I in my kitchen? And that's because composting really starts in the kitchen. I have two compost bins. This is the compost bin that ends up going into my compost pile. This is because it has fruits and vegetables, but it doesn't have any meat, dairy, anything that gets greasy. You don't want that in your compost pile because that will attract animals, because of course it smells, and the animals will come over and demolish your compost pile. And I'm not saying that they won't be attracted by the smell of rotting fruits and vegetables, but it's definitely less likely that rotting fruits and vegetables will bring animals to your compost pile, whereas it's almost a certainty that meat and dairy will. Right now it's about half full. I'm going to be adding these cooked potatoes. I'm going to cut them into smaller pieces because as they are, they only have a certain surface area for microbes and worms and little critters that are going to be decomposing these vegetables for us to access. So if I want them to decompose faster, then I need to increase the surface area upon which those little critters can act. So I've got my cutting board right here, a knife, potatoes, and I'm just going to eyeball this. I'm slicing it into 5 slices, and then I'm just going to cut each slice in half. And then I'm going to slide those into my compost box. Step of our composting is done. We have our fruits and vegetables ready to go out into the compost pile in our backyard and where they will decompose. So the next step in Composting 101 is determining the right location for your compost pile. So there are important factors that you need to consider when you're choosing your location for your compost pile, and I'll get into that once we're outside. So let's go outside. So here we are in my backyard, as you can see, on the edge of a forest. I have already started a compost pile right here, but my experience with this compost pile has actually confirmed what I learned from my compost book, which is that compost piles need to consistently be moist. This is because that's the type of environment that the microbes that you want for decomposing the organic material thrive the best in. So in order to maintain that moist compost pile, what you need is a shady location. At the moment, the spot where I have my compost pile looks like a shady location, but at other times of the day it isn't, because of course the sun moves across the sky and it ends up shining on spots that weren't previously shone upon earlier in the day. For this second compost pile that I'm going to be making, I'm going to try and pick a better spot. So that means for me going deeper into the forest, so that no matter where the sun is in the sky, it won't shine on my compost pile and then dry it out, which is the problem that I've had with this compost pile. I'll keep it moist by spraying it with a hose, but in a couple days time, especially if we have particularly sunny days, it'll be dry. So I know that any microbes that had been working when the compost was moist are now dead, because they just can't survive in a dry location. So now we're a little farther back into the forest, and I've chosen a spot just a couple feet behind me for my compost pile. As you can see, I've got gloves on. This is because when you are working in the bush, you really don't know what kind of plants you're going to be touching, so you want to be wearing gloves. Additionally, you should really be wearing long pants, and I highly recommend that if you guys are going to be working in the bush, you do that. I'm entitled to be wearing shorter pants because I'm a country bumpkin, so I'm allowed to risk my physical health for the sake of laziness and convenience. Do as I say, not as I do. In addition to my gloves, I do have two handy dandy tools here with me. These are some clippers that I can use to cut branches that are blocking me from my ideal compost location. And this is a saw in the case that I encounter any large trees that this won't be able to cut through. So I'm going to start out with cutting a couple of the branches that are blocking my location, since it will be important that I'll be able to bring a wheelbarrow into here, since that's how I will transport various compost ingredients that I'll be putting into my pile. Always be careful when you're cutting branches that are over top of you. Safety first, you don't want a crack on your head. So now I've removed the branches that are blocking my movement to and from my ideal location. So now I'm going to be removing any brush that's on the ground. In this particular spot there are a lot of branches, downed, well, branches really, just branches and leaves. I've removed most of the sticks that were there. There were a few pieces of wood that had partially decomposed, and so I'm going to leave those in the compost pile because they will eventually contribute to it, and it won't take that long since they are partially decomposed already. I have also put a bunch of the leaves, the dead leaves that were on the ground, into that location because leaves will produce the carbon that will eventually contribute to the compost pile. And what I mean by that is that decomposition is jump-started when you achieve an ideal carbon-nitrogen ratio. While carbon is typically contributed by what we call brown matter, so dead leaves, cardboard, wood, maybe newspaper, as long as the ink is not made of toxic ingredients, which normally typical newspaper isn't. So that stuff contributes the carbon, and nitrogen is contributed by what we call green matter, which is the kitchen waste that I collected in my kitchen, any grass clippings that haven't yet dried out, and additionally any dead plants that you might be removing, perhaps in the fall when they're spent. Be sure not to include diseased plants. This is because since this compost will be going back into your garden to nourish your plants, you really don't want it to be diseased. The ideal compost nitrogen ratio is 30:1. That's 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. So if you achieve that ideal carbon-nitrogen ratio, there will be such a variety and amount of microbes working to decompose your compost that the inside of your compost pile will actually reach 160 degrees Celsius, potentially. In order to get that ideal carbon-nitrogen ratio of 30:1, you want to put 1 part green matter to roughly 2 to 3 parts brown matter. Since this is composting 101 and you're just starting out, don't worry too much about the ratio. If you can get about twice as much brown matter to green matter, that's great. And then once you get that going, then feel free to start playing around with the ratios a bit more, seeing what works. But really, the best thing to do if you've never done compost pile is to just get it done, get it out on the ground, and let it go, and then put it on your garden and do a soil test probably about a month or 2 after you put the compost on the garden, and see what levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium you have in your garden. Of course, this is even more effective if you've done those tests before you put the compost, and then you have a better idea of what was already there and what you have added to your garden. So here I've got my kitchen waste that I collected earlier, and I also have a wheelbarrow of dead leaves and leaf mold that I collected from a pile that I had made last fall when we were raking the leaves in our yard. Now what I mean when I say leaf mold is the substance that leaves turn into when they decompose, which is very dark and crumbly, almost looks like soil, but even more black. As you can see, there are still some chunks in there, both from leaves and pine needles that have been incorporated into the leaves. That's leaf mold. It's not finished compost, but it's going to be very good for the compost that I'm making. If you don't have any piles of leaves that have been there for a year, just take any dead leaves. They will eventually break down, but they will break down even faster if you chop them up. So if you have a leaf blower that turns into a vacuum and shredder, or if you just have a leaf shredder, that will help quicken up the process of the leaves decomposing into leaf mold and eventually compost once they're combined with our green matter. I've already placed some dead leaves onto the spot where I'm going to be making my compost pile. I'll dump my kitchen waste there. Ideally, I'd like to layer my brown matter and my green matter so that it's all touching each other, and that will definitely quicken up the decomposition process. I've done that, I'll go in with my leaf mold and I'll make sure to cover it up. As I layer, I intend to cover up my green matter with a fairly thick layer of brown matter, since, as I mentioned before, green matter can occasionally attract animals, even when it doesn't include any meat or dairy products. By covering up the green matter completely with brown matter, it'll help dampen the smell that much more so that animals won't get into my compost pile. Covered my green matter with my brown matter, and that is the start of a new compost pile. I could stop there if that's the extent of my green matter, but I do have quite a bit more green matter in the black box that you might have seen on the ground behind me earlier in this video. So I'm going to go ahead and intersperse the green matter that I have in my black box with the brown matter that I have in my wheelbarrow. Here is a better look of my compost pile. Basically, I just layered my green matter, my brown matter, and then I covered it with a few dead leaves that I just found in the immediate vicinity. Obviously, there isn't a shortage of that. So yeah, that's what I have so far. It's definitely going to get bigger as I add to it. I'm not yet out of green matter or brown matter. I just felt that this was enough for this particular video. So the last thing to do is to moisten my compost pile, which is where I'll just take a hose and I'll spray my compost pile until I feel that it's evenly damp. I don't want any regions to be too dry or too moist. Preferably it will be evenly moist, and thus the microbes will be able to propagate all throughout the pile. So I hope that was educational, or at least informational. I'm not sure if that's a word, but we'll go with it because I really enjoyed making this. It's been a product of probably a whole summer's worth of research on my part. I had that book on compost that I mentioned in an earlier video that I've been reading through, and I've also been experimenting on my own with previous compost piles. So thank you so much for watching this, and if you like it, please like, subscribe, and maybe even share it with a friend. That would be much appreciated by me, and will let me know that you guys are enjoying these videos. If you would like to see a particular topic, please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys later. Happy gardening, eh?